The Bearing Boar was less a tavern and more a steel box designed to prevent the will to live from escaping into the Aleutian wind. It was a place of condensation and complaint, hunkered down on the volcanic scree of Adak Island like a rusted barnacle on the hull of the world. On this Christmas Eve, the wind outside screamed with a banshee's fury, a constant, high-pitched scouring of ice and grit against the salt-streaked windows. Inside, the air was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 cigarettes smoked long ago, mingled with the present-day odors of wet wool, spilled beer, and the faint, metallic tang of diesel fuel that clung to the men like a second skin. The light was a jaundiced yellow, cast down from caged bulbs that hummed a low, mournful drone, a sound that vibrated in the teeth and settled deep in the bones. The floor was perpetually damp, a slick mosaic of mud and spilled liquor, and the bar itself, carved from the dark, heavy wood of some forgotten shipwreck, was scarred with the rings of countless glasses and the angry etchings of bored knives. This was a sanctuary for the forgotten, a purgatory for those assigned to the edge of civilization, where the primary currency was cynical laughter and the only faith was in the eventual rotation back to the world. In a corner booth, away from the boisterous knot of sailors at the bar, sat a woman. She did not belong. Every line of her posture, every detail of her presence, was an anomaly in this ecosystem of loud, masculine despair. She was of average height, with a frame that seemed slight under a simple gray wool sweater and dark, functional trousers. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, disciplined knot at the nape of her neck, revealing a face that was more structure than softness, all clean lines and an economy of expression. It was a face that gave nothing away. She held a thick, dog-eared paperback in her hands, its title obscured by her steady grip, and her focus upon its pages was so absolute it seemed to generate a palpable field of silence around her. She did not nurse a drink. A simple glass of water sat untouched before her, its surface placidly reflecting the jaundiced light from above. To the casual observer, she might have been a researcher waylaid by the storm, a government contractor waiting for a flight that would never come. She was anonymous, a blank space in a room full of bold, underlined text. This anonymity was a craft, honed to a level of perfection that rendered her functionally invisible. She was a ghost before she was dead, a master of being overlooked, a practitioner of a stillness so profound it bordered on a physical law. Holding court at the center of the room's gravity was Petty Officer First Class Dale Rourke, a man known to all, with varying degrees of affection and fear, as Bull. The nickname was an apt and artless summary of his existence. He was a large man, built not with the lean, functional muscle of a warrior but with the heavy, dense bulk of a dockside brawler. His face, ruddy from wind and whiskey, looked as though it had been carved from naval tradition itself, all hard planes and a perpetually belligerent jut to the jaw. Authority radiated from him, not the quiet, earned authority of a true leader, but the loud, performative authority of a man who mistakes volume for command. He was the self-appointed king of this forgotten island, his throne a wobbly barstool, his scepter a half-empty bottle of cheap bourbon. His voice, a gravelly boom, dominated the cramped space, a constant broadcast of grievances, boasts, and crude jokes that his small coterie of younger, less confident sailors received with the dutiful laughter of courtiers. To Bull Rourke, the world was a simple hierarchy, and he had spent his entire career ensuring he was never on the bottom rung of any ladder he stood on. He saw life as a series of confrontations to be won, of territories to be marked, and of lesser beings to be put firmly in their place. His gaze, sweeping his domain with a proprietor's arrogance, eventually fell upon the woman in the corner. He watched her for a long moment, his brow furrowed in a caricature of deep thought. In his world, a woman sitting alone in a place like this was one of two things: a problem to be solved or an opportunity to be exploited. Her intense focus on her book, her utter disregard for the social gravity of the room he so carefully maintained, was not just an anomaly. It was an affront. It was a pocket of silence in his cathedral of noise, a challenge to his unwritten rule that nothing in the Bearing Boar happened without his acknowledgement or permission. He saw her slight build, her plain clothes, her quiet demeanor, and his mind, a blunt instrument of prejudice and assumption, rendered its verdict with swift and certain finality. She was a tourist, a lost academic, a soft civilian who had wandered into a hard place. She was weak, and her weakness, to a man like Bull Rourke, was an invitation. He slid off his stool, the legs scraping a protest against the gritty floor. The sycophantic laughter of his crew tapered off as they watched him, sensing the beginning of a familiar ritual. He moved with a heavy, rolling gait, a predator closing in, not with stealth, but with the arrogant certainty of an apex animal in its own territory. He loomed over her table, a great slab of a man casting a shadow that swallowed her and her small book whole. "You're a long way from the library, lady," he began, his voice dripping with a condescending amusement that was meant for his audience as much as for her. The woman did not look up. She turned a page. The small, crisp sound of the paper was a gunshot in the sudden quiet. Rourke's smirk tightened. This was not the flustered, intimidated response he expected. This was nothing. It was a vacuum. He felt a flicker of irritation. He had offered the cue for her to be cowed, and she had missed it. He glanced back at his men, a small, almost imperceptible gesture to assure them that the performance was still under his control. He leaned forward, planting his thick, meaty hands on her table, the impact making her glass of water tremble. The book remained steady in her grip. "I said," he repeated, his voice lower now, edged with a theatrical menace, "you're in the wrong place. This is a bar for sailors. Not for whatever you are." Slowly, deliberately, she raised her eyes from the page. They were dark and so devoid of any discernible emotion. Not fear, not anger, not even annoyance, that it was profoundly unsettling. They were the eyes of a geologist studying a rock. They registered his presence, catalogued his features, and dismissed him as irrelevant data, all in the space of a single silent second. "I'm aware of my location, petty officer," she said. Her voice was calm, level, and held a precision that was jarringly at odds with the slurred chaos of the bar. The use of his rank was not a sign of respect, but a simple statement of fact, delivered with the clinical detachment of a doctor identifying a symptom. Rourke blinked. The clinical identification of his rank, stripped of the deference he felt it was owed, threw him off balance. He had expected a stammer, a protest, perhaps a fearful apology. He had not expected this unnerving, analytical calm. It was like shouting at a granite cliff face and receiving only the cold echo of his own voice. His frustration began to curdle into genuine anger. He felt the eyes of his men on his back. His authority was being challenged, not by a fist or an insult, but by an utter and infuriating lack of reaction. She was treating him like he wasn't there, like he was nothing more than a temporary obstruction of the light. He decided to escalate. His worldview had no category for this kind of female response. It had to be a bluff, a facade of toughness that a little physical pressure would shatter. He reached out and, with a flick of his thick finger, sent her book skittering across the table and onto the grimy floor. "Reading hours over," he snarled, pleased with the small act of violation. "Show some respect." She did not flinch. She did not gasp. Her gaze followed the book to the floor, then returned to his face. The absolute stillness was back, but this time it was different. It was heavier. It felt less like peace and more like the coiled, patient silence of something immensely dangerous. She was a lioness allowing a jackal to dance at the edge of its kill radius, watching with a dispassionate curiosity to see just how stupid it was willing to be. The simile, of course, would have been lost on Bull Rourke. He saw only a stubborn woman who needed a stronger lesson. "Pick it up," she said. The words were not a request. They were an order, delivered in a flat, dead tone that held the promise of swift and irreversible consequences. Rourke laughed, a loud, barking sound that was more relief than humor. An order. Finally, a reaction he understood. He could work with an order. He could crush it. "I don't think so. Maybe you should pick it up. And then you can get the hell out of my bar." He leaned in closer, invading her personal space, using his physical mass as a weapon of intimidation. The air crackled with a tension that was now felt by everyone in the room. The younger sailors shifted uncomfortably. The game had gone on long enough. It was ceasing to be entertainment. It was at that precise moment, the moment before Rourke's ego would have forced him into an act of genuine physical aggression, that God, or whatever passed for it in the North Pacific, decided to intervene. A klaxon blared, a piercing electronic shriek that cut through the bar's thick atmosphere like a surgeon's blade. It was the all-hands emergency signal, a sound no one, not even the most drunken sailor, could ignore. It was immediately followed by a voice over the base-wide intercom, a voice stretched thin with the metallic wire of panic. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. All stations, this is ADAC command. We have a vessel in distress, the civilian research ship Triton's Folly. 14 souls on board. Location is 3 nautical miles north of Gannett Rock. Vessel has lost all power and propulsion. I repeat, vessel is dead in the water, taking on water in a sea state 9. All available personnel report to the comms center immediately." The room froze for a heartbeat. The personal drama vaporized by the intrusion of a genuine, life-or-death crisis. Sea State 9, off Gannett Rock. In this storm, it wasn't a distress call. It was a death sentence. The men looked at each other, their drunken bravado draining from their faces, replaced by the grim, sober understanding of what those words meant. The wind howling outside was no longer just background noise. It was the voice of a killer. Gannett Rock was a jagged maw of volcanic teeth that had been chewing on ships for centuries. In a storm like this, a boat with no power would be reduced to splinters and memories in under an hour. Panic, in its initial stages, looks a lot like confusion. The duty officer, a young ensign barely out of the academy, was a case study in controlled terror. His face was pale. His hands shook as he tried to manage 3 different communication channels at once. In the small, crowded comm center, chaos reigned. Men shouted conflicting information, suggestions were made and immediately dismissed as suicidal, and the established chain of command, a skeleton crew on a holiday evening, proved utterly unequal to the moment. Bull Rourke, having lumbered from the bar with his cronies, was true to form. He was loud, decisive, and completely wrong. "Get the Jayhawk in the air," he bellowed, shoving a younger sailor out of his way to glare at a radar screen showing a maelstrom of green and red. "Sir, winds are gusting to 90 knots, a technician yelled back. "The flight ceiling is 0. They can't even lift off, let alone fly into that." "Then get the cutter moving," Rourke countered, his solution to any problem being the application of more force. "The Steadfast is 6 hours out on patrol, Bull," another man said, his voice grim. "She'll get here in time to collect the bodies, not save them." Rourke slammed a fist on a console. His authority, so absolute in the trivial world of the bar, was useless here. The storm did not care how loud he was. The ocean would not be intimidated. He was a master of dominating men, but against the raw, impersonal fury of nature, he was just another scared sailor, his bluster a pathetic shield against the terrifying reality of the situation. He and the others were trapped in the first stage of disaster response. The frantic search for a standard procedure that simply did not exist. They were following a flowchart that led only to a box labeled catastrophic failure. Into this vortex of panicked incompetence, she moved, the woman from the bar. She had followed them from the Bering Bore, her approach so quiet, so unobtrusive, that no one had noticed her entry into the comms center. She stood for a moment at the back of the room, her eyes scanning the chaos, not with alarm, but with the same unnerving, analytical calm she had displayed before. Her mind was not processing the panic. It was processing data. Wind speed, wave height, GPS coordinates, tidal charts, asset availability, personnel response. In the space of 10 seconds, she had built a complete 3-dimensional model of the crisis in her head, identified the critical failure points in the current response, and calculated the one, desperately improbable path to a solution. She moved then, not with the hesitant shuffle of an outsider, but with the fluid, economical grace of a dancer or a surgeon. She glided through the knot of frantic men, a river parting around a stone, and stopped beside the terrified ensign at the main console. She did not ask for permission. She did not introduce herself. She gently but inexorably took the headset from his trembling hand and placed it over her own ears. "This is ADAC Command," she said into the microphone. Her voice was utterly transformed. The flat, quiet tone from the bar was gone, replaced by a voice of pure, unadulterated command. It was a voice that did not brook argument, a voice that assumed competence and demanded execution. It was a voice that cut through the static on the radio and the panic in the room with the clean, sharp edge of a diamond blade. "Triton's Folly, what is your current rate of drift and list angle?" "Over." The room fell silent. Every eye turned to her. Bull Rourke opened his mouth to object, to demand who the hell she thought she was, but the words died in his throat. The sheer, undeniable authority in her voice was a physical force that pinned him in place. It was an authority that came not from a rank on a collar but from a deep, instinctual, and terrifying well of competence. Panicked voice crackled back over the speaker. "ADAC, we're drifting at 8 knots. Bearing 270. We're listing 15 degrees to port. The rocks? My God. We can see the rocks." "Copy, Triton," the woman said, her voice a glacier of calm. "Listen to me very carefully. You have a sea anchor." "Yes, but in this sea? It'll tear apart. Deploy it off your starboard bow. Now," she commanded. "It won't hold you, but it will change your drift vector and slow your rotation. It will buy you minutes. Execute." She then turned her attention away from the radio, her mind already 3 steps ahead. Her eyes locked onto a large, illuminated map of the island on the wall. "You," she said, pointing a finger at a stunned-looking communications tech without looking at him. "Get me a real-time wave periodicity model for the lee side of Gannett Rock. I need to know the interval between the 7th and 9th wave sets. Synchronize it with the tidal outflow from the Kagalaska Strait." The tech just stared at her, his mouth agape. The string of words was a foreign language of expertise. "Now," she snapped, the word a crack of a whip. The tech jumped as if electrocuted and scrambled to his keyboard, his fingers flying. Her gaze swept the room. "I need 2 Zodiac F470s. Fully fueled. With twin 55 horsepower engines, not the 40s. I want them equipped with forward-looking infrared, GPS, and full cold water immersion kits for a crew of 4 each. And I need a coxswain who can handle a boat in a breaking surf." Bull Rourke, a master coxswain and the most experienced boat handler on the island, found his voice, though it was strangely muted. "That's suicide. No Zodiac can survive that sea. They'll be swamped and torn to pieces before they even clear the harbor." She finally turned her head and looked directly at him. Her eyes were not angry. They were not contemptuous. They were simply assessing. She was looking at a piece of equipment, judging its capabilities and its limitations. "A standard approach is suicide, petty officer," she said, her voice clinical. "We will not be making a standard approach. We will use the outflow current from the strait as a slingshot to get us past the outer break. We will ride the back of the 12th wave in each set, using the trough for cover. We will approach the Triton not from seaward, but from the shore side, through the channel north of the main rock. It is a 100-meter-wide needle that you will have to thread in the dark in a hurricane. So I will ask you again. Are you a coxswain who can handle a boat in a breaking surf?" The sheer technical audacity of the plan was breathtaking. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was a maneuver of such high risk and exquisite precision that no one in that room had ever conceived of it, let alone thought it possible. It was a plan born from a mind that did not see a storm as an obstacle, but as a complex tactical problem with a set of variables to be manipulated. Rourke stood there, his entire conception of the sea, of his own expertise, being dismantled and reassembled before his eyes by this woman. He had been a king in a child's playground. He was now standing in the presence of a god of the ocean, and she had just handed him a thunderbolt and asked if he knew how to use it. "I can," he heard himself say, the words coming out as a choked whisper. "Good," she replied, already turning away, her focus moving to the next problem. You'll be in boat 1. You, she said, pointing to another senior bosun's mate. You're on boat 2. Get your crews. Full gear. Meet at the pier in 10 minutes. Move. The men, including Rourke, moved. They did not question. They did not hesitate. They were no longer sailors in a chaotic command center. They were instruments being wielded by a master. Her commands were not suggestions to be debated. They were facts of a new reality they were compelled to inhabit. The entire room was transformed from a hub of panic into a ruthlessly efficient machine, and she was its central processing unit. She stood at the console, one hand on the map, the other on the radio, coordinating helicopter readiness for the moment the storm broke, tasking medical teams, and talking the captain of the Triton's folly through the deployment of the sea anchor, her voice a lifeline of impossible calm in the roaring chaos. The onlookers, the junior sailors, the technicians, stood frozen in a state of silent, collective awe. They were witnessing a masterclass, a virtuoso performance of command and control under extreme pressure that none of them would ever forget. They were watching a legend being forged in real time, and they didn't even know her name. The air on the pier was a solid wall of freezing water and fury. The wind shrieked and tore at them, trying to rip the very breath from their lungs. The Zodiacs, black and menacing, strained against their moorings in the churning, black water of the harbor. Bull Rourke, his face numb from the spray, gripped the tiller of his boat, his knuckles white. Every instinct, every year of his hard-won experience at sea, screamed at him that this was impossible. But the woman's voice, patched through their helmet comms, was a steady, unwavering signal in the storm of his doubt. She wasn't on the boat. She was back in the comm center, the Overwatch, as she'd called it. She was seeing the entire battle space through radar, infrared, and the complex calculus of wave dynamics playing out in her head. She was their eyes and their brain. Overwatch to Boat 1, her voice crackled, impossibly clear amidst the gale. Stand by. I am tracking the next major set. Your launch window opens in 45 seconds. You will execute on my mark. You will proceed on a heading of 015 for 200 meters, then hard to starboard. Do you copy, Bull? The use of his nickname was not familiar. It was proprietary. She was labeling her tool. Boat 1 copies, Rourke grunted, his own voice sounding weak and thin against the storm. Stand by, mark, execute now. Rourke slammed the throttles forward. The twin engines screamed and the Zodiac leaped from the relative calm of the harbor into the mouth of hell. A mountain of black water rose up before them, and Rourke's heart seized. But he held the course she gave him, a course that made no sense, a course that took them parallel to the wave, not into it. For a terrifying second, they were in the wave's shadow, a momentary valley of calm created by the hydrodynamics she had predicted. Then, as she had commanded, he threw the tiller hard over. The boat pivoted, and the wave, instead of crushing them, lifted them and threw them forward like a catapult. They were through the outer break. It was a miracle of physics and timing. It was the work of a genius. Just as they stabilized, a new voice cut into the comms channel, this one laced with the heavy static of a satellite connection. It was powerful, authoritative, and deeply concerned. ADAC command. This is NAVSPECWARCOM actual. What in God's name is going on up there? I'm seeing an unauthorized small boat launch in a conditioned Zulu storm. Give me a sit rep, now. The young ensign's panicked voice came over the line. Admiral Hayes, sir. This is Ensign Miller. We have a vessel in distress. The Triton's folly, sir. And there was a brief pause, and then the woman's calm, steady voice replaced the ensign's. Admiral, this is Overwatch. We have 2 F-470s en route to the vessel. We have threaded the outer break and are proceeding through the lee channel. Estimated time to contact is 8 minutes. There was a stunned silence from the satellite link. The voice that came back was completely different, stripped of its anger and filled with a sudden, dawning recognition and disbelief. That voice, Naga, is that you? A beat of silence. Then, from the woman, affirmative, Admiral. I was on island when the call came in. decided to lend a hand. Her tone was as casual as if she were discussing borrowing a cup of sugar. In the Zodiac, Bull Rourke felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the storm. Naga. The name echoed in the dark, classified corners of his memory. It wasn't a name, it was a myth. A call sign whispered in awe by SEALs and fleet operators. A name attached to a dozen impossible missions in places that didn't officially exist. Naga. The ghost operator. The strategist who could outthink supercomputers. The Sea Dragon. Admiral Hayes's voice came back over the comms, and it was now a steel whip of absolute command directed at the entire island. Listen up, ADAC. All personnel. You have Sea Dragon on station. You are no longer in a rescue operation. You are in a naval special warfare evolution under her direct command. You will give Commander Sharma anything she requires, up to and including the keys to this entire base. That is a direct order from NAVSPECWARCOM. Acknowledge. The words descended on the comms net like a tactical nuclear strike. Commander Sharma. The rank hit Bull Rourke with the force of a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs more effectively than any wave. Commander. An 05. A senior officer. This quiet, unassuming woman he had harassed, belittled, and physically intimidated was not just an officer. She was a legend in the most elite and ruthless military community on the planet. He felt a wave of nausea so profound it almost made him lose his grip on the tiller. He had not just been rude to a superior officer. He had danced like a fool in front of a deity of his own profession. He had offered a lit match to the sun. The rescue was a brutal, beautiful thing. Commander Sharma talked them through the channel, her voice a metronome of calm, her instructions a miracle of precision. Boat 1, 10 degrees to port. Avoid that submerged rock 20 meters off your bow. Boat 2, increase speed, you're falling behind the trough. She saw everything. She knew everything. They pulled alongside the battered research vessel, and under her guidance, Rourke and his men performed a flawless evacuation, pulling 14 terrified, hypothermic civilians from a sinking ship that was minutes away from being torn to shreds on the rocks. By the time they returned to the harbor, the storm was already beginning to break, as if exhausted by its failed attempt to defy her will. Back in the warmth and light of the debriefing room, the rescued civilians were being treated by medics. The atmosphere was one of shock and elation. Bull Rourke and the other boat crews stood in a dripping, exhausted huddle, their awe for Commander Sharma so complete it was a visible aura in the room. She stood by the main map, talking quietly on the phone to Admiral Hayes, her posture once again unassuming, her work done. When she finished the call, she turned and her eyes found Rourke. She beckoned to him with a single, small gesture of her finger. He approached her, his body rigid with a fear he had never known before. He felt stripped bare, his decades of swagger and arrogance flensed from his bones, leaving him shivering and exposed. He stopped before her and executed the sharpest, most formal salute of his life. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a raw croak. She did not return the salute. She simply looked at him, her gaze as analytical as it had been in the bar. "Your performance as a coxswain was exemplary, Petty Officer Rourke," she said, her voice quiet again, but now it was the quiet of a controlled detonation. "Your boat handling under those conditions was in the top 1% of any I have ever witnessed." Rourke felt a flush of pathetic gratitude. "Thank you, ma'am. However," she continued, and the word hung in the air like a guillotine's blade, "your performance as a United States Navy sailor prior to the crisis was a catastrophic failure." She took a step closer, and though she was a foot shorter and 100 pounds lighter, she seemed to tower over him. "Your job is to assess threats. You are trained to evaluate a tactical situation, identify unknown variables, and act with discipline and caution. Tonight, in that bar, you faced an unknown quantity. You had no intelligence, no data, and you initiated a hostile confrontation based on a single, flawed assumption derived from your own personal prejudice." She let the words sink in. He could feel the eyes of his crew, of the entire room, on him. This was not a dressing down. It was a clinical, methodical dissection. It was an autopsy of his character. You did not see a potential asset, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. You did not see a fellow service member. You did not even see a citizen you are sworn to protect. You saw a woman, and your primitive reptilian brain decided she was weak, an easy target for you to dominate to amuse your subordinates and bolster your own fragile ego. That is not just a personal failing, petty officer. It is a tactical liability of the highest order. Your prejudice blinded you. What if I had been a threat? What if I had been a foreign intelligence agent or a terrorist gathering information? Your little display of masculine dominance would have been the opening they needed. Your ego could have compromised the security of this entire installation. She paused. Tonight, your failure almost cost 14 lives. Not because of what you did in the storm, but because of what you did in the bar. You failed to recognize the most valuable asset on this island. You were prepared to discard it, to throw it away, because it did not fit your narrow, bigoted worldview. You are a powerful tool in the water, Rourke. But your mind is undisciplined, and your judgment is a weapon pointed at your own feet. Rourke could say nothing. There was nothing to say. Every word was true, a perfectly aimed shot that struck him in the very core of his identity. He had never been so thoroughly, so completely, and so justly humbled in his entire life. I have spoken with the Admiral, she continued. He has agreed that a formal uniform code of military justice proceeding would be inefficient. It would punish you. It would not correct you. And I am more interested in correction than punishment. She looked past him at the young ensign. Mr. Miller, you will cut orders reassigning Petty Officer Rourke, effective 0600 tomorrow morning. His new duty station will be Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. He is to report to me. He will be my personal coxswain for the next 6 months. A collective, silent gasp went through the room. It was a fate worse and more brilliant than any brig time. He would not be broken. He would be reforged. He would spend every single day for the next 180 days in the direct presence of his own humiliation. He would be forced to witness, up close, the competence he had derided. He would have to serve the very person whose authority he had so arrogantly challenged. It was not a punishment. It was an education. A brutal, relentless, and deeply personal education. You will learn, Petty Officer, Sharma said, her voice leaving no room for doubt. You will learn that the strength of an operator is not in their size, or their gender, or the volume of their voice. It is in their mind. It is in their discipline. You will learn to see the asset, not the package it comes in. I will teach you. That is all. Dismissed. The story of what happened on Adak Island on that Christmas Eve passed into the quiet, unwritten lore of the naval special warfare community. It became a teaching tool, a modern military fable told to new generations of operators in the dark of a C-130, or over beers in a dusty bar in some forgotten corner of the world. The details grew with each telling, of course. The waves became 100 feet high, the winds became a Category 5 hurricane, and Commander Sharma was said to have navigated the zodiacs by tasting the salt in the air. But the core of the story, the essential truth of it, remained unchanged. It was a story about the danger of assumptions. Years later, a grizzled Master Chief stood before a class of exhausted, hopeful young men shivering in the cold surf of Coronado. They were in the final, brutal stages of basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, the crucible designed to strip a man down to his raw essence. The Master Chief was a legend, one of the toughest, most respected instructors at the school. His name was Dale Rourke. He was leaner now, the brawler's bulk replaced by the hard, dense muscle of an operator. The belligerence in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, watchful intelligence. He waded into the surf among the trainees. "Listen to me," he said, his voice a low gravel that still commanded attention, but without the need for volume. "You think you're the toughest men on the planet. You think because you've made it this far, you're something special. You're not. You're just engines. Powerful, dumb engines. Your real weapon isn't in your arms or your legs. Here he tapped his temple. It's your judgment. And your judgment is worthless if it's clouded by ego and prejudice." He scanned their faces. Let me tell you a story, a Christmas story, about a time I met the most dangerous operator I ever knew. I didn't see a warrior. I saw a small woman in a bar, and I decided, with all the unearned confidence of a fool, that I was better than her. I decided she was weak, and that mistaken judgment, that single, stupid, arrogant assumption, almost killed 14 innocent people. He let the silence hang in the cold air. That operator could have ended my career, could have had me thrown in the brig for a decade. But she didn't. She did something worse. She taught me. She spent 6 months forcing me to see the world through her eyes, forcing me to respect the mind over the muscle. The most dangerous person in a room is never the loudest. They are the quietest. They are the one you don't see, the one you underestimate. Your assumptions will get you killed. They will get your team killed. You look at everyone, and I mean everyone, as a potential asset or a potential threat. But you never, ever judge them by the cover. You will let their actions, and only their actions, be their argument. The moral of this story, this modern fable born of wind and water and hubris, is not just for the sailors and the warriors. It is for all of us. True strength, the kind that can command the sea and calm the storm, is not loud. It does not boast. It has no need for validation from lesser beings. It is quiet. It is competent. It is disciplined. It is the calm, steady voice that cuts through the panic. It is the mind that sees the solution while others are still yelling about the problem. Hubris is a disease of the insecure. It is the loud, frantic attempt to build a kingdom on a foundation of sand. It mistakes volume for value and dominance for respect. It is an enemy that lives within the most dangerous of all tactical liabilities. Do not be the bull, roaring in the tavern of your own small world. Be the storm master, the quiet professional. Assess, do not assume. Listen, do not shout. Let your substance be your style, and let your competence be the only authority you ever need. For in the final accounting, the world does not bend to the loudest voice. It yields to the steadiest hand.